30th of September, 1999. 3,000 workers walked through the gates on Industrial Drive, Mayfield, for the last time. By midday, a single siren ends 84 years of steelmaking in Newcastle. The city that steel built just lost the thing it was built around. But the decision that stopped Australia making its own steel was not made that morning. It was not even made that decade. Molten steel glowed orange in the ladle at 9:45 that morning. After 84 years, this was the last pour. Shift workers stood by their stations, faces lit by the heat, hands steady on the tools they had used for decades. Some kept moving, checking gauges, watching the flow, refusing to let habit break even now. Others stood silent, eyes fixed on the metal as it ran out for the final time. The air inside the shed was thick with dust and memory. A few men wiped sweat from their brows, not just from the heat. Minutes stretched. The old routines, calling out the timing, watching the stream, marking the end of a shift, played out one last time. At 12:03, the siren sounded. Its wail echoed through the plant, rolling out across the city. For decades, that sound had meant shift change, lunch break, home time. On this day, it meant something else entirely. Men paused, heads bowed, some with arms folded tight across their chests. The siren faded, leaving a hollow quiet where there had always been noise. On the floor, boots scraped concrete as workers gathered their things. Some reached for small keepsakes, a helmet, a glove, a scrap of steel. A few shook hands. Others just nodded. No words could fill the silence that followed the siren. Outside, the gate stood open, but no one rushed. After the last pour and the last siren, time seemed to hold its breath. The works had finished its final job. Newcastle steelmaking was done. The gates on Industrial Drive stood open, waiting for the procession. Just after the siren's echo faded, the workers began to file out. 2,000 employees, 1,000 contractors, 3,000 people in all, walked through the gates together, boots heavy on the bitumen. Some clutched lunch pails or hard hats. A few carried small bars of steel, tokens from the last shift. The line stretched across the road, a river of men and women who had given their working lives to this place. On the footpath, families gathered, wives, sons, daughters, grandchildren. Some held up homemade signs. Others just stood, hands in pockets, eyes searching the faces in the crowd. The kids were quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. Old-timers nodded to each other, remembering fathers and grandfathers who had walked the same path in better days. No one rushed. The walk was slow, almost ceremonial. There was no applause, just a hush broken by the odd sob or a call of recognition. For many, this was the last time they would wear the uniform, the last time their name would be on the roster. When the last of the workers had passed, the gatekeepers closed the book on 84 years. The machinery had stopped, but the silence outside felt heavier. One oral history recalls that it was as if the whole city held its breath. The numbers, 3,000 out the gates that day, could never capture what was lost. Not just jobs, but the sense of belonging, the rhythm of a city built around steel. How did it come to this? In June 1915, the Newcastle Steelworks opened its gates for the first time. The ceremony drew a crowd, dignitaries, workers in their Sunday best, and families hopeful for steady work. From that day, steel became Newcastle's backbone. The blast furnaces roared through war and peace, feeding rails, ships, bridges, and the bones of new suburbs. Mayfield, Stockton, Carrington, and Tighes Hill each took shape around the works, their streets filling with the families of men who clocked in before dawn and washed off the grit each night. For generations, the steelworks wasn't just a job. Apprenticeships started at 15 or 16, often handed down from father to son. Mornings began with the siren, echoing down the valley, calling men from every corner of the city. By 1981, the payroll listed 11,000 names, the highest it would ever reach. Over 84 years, more than 50,000 Novocastrians spent part of their lives inside the fence. Some stayed a few months, others a lifetime. The numbers alone cannot measure the pride or the sweat poured into that place. The plant's reach stretched far beyond its gates. Local shops, pubs and footy clubs thrived on shift rosters. School rolls swelled with the children of steelworkers. In the union halls and at backyard barbecues, the talk was always of the works, pay packets, new machinery, the odd accident, and the promise of overtime. The city's rhythm matched the plant's, and the plant's fortune set the tone for Newcastle itself. For decades, it seemed unthinkable that the steelworks could ever fall silent. But beneath the surface, pressures were building, policy changes, global shifts, and decisions made in distant boardrooms. The scale of what stood to be lost was measured not just in jobs, but in the fabric of a city built by steel. The 1980s brought a reckoning that changed the shape of Australian steel forever. In Canberra, Senator John Button took the helm as Minister for Industry and Commerce, steering the Hawke government's steel plan through Parliament. Button was blunt about the future. The industry would have to shrink to survive. The plan offered BHP and other producers a lifeline, $525 million in government support over 6 years. But every dollar came with strings attached. In exchange for capital to modernise plants and keep the furnaces burning, the companies agreed to cut capacity, close outdated lines, and accept a steep drop in protective tariffs. The old 25% shield on imported steel was slashed to just 5%. The numbers tell the story. In 1983, more than 74,000 Australians worked in steel. By 1989, that figure had fallen to around 61,000. Newcastle bore the brunt, with its steelworks workforce dropping from 11,000 at the start of the decade to about 8,500 by the end. Nationally, 25,000 jobs vanished in 6 years. In Newcastle, about 10,000 positions were lost, nearly a third of the city's industrial base. By 1990, only around 5,000 men and women remained inside the wire. For many, the cuts were more than numbers on a page. Each redundancy meant a family uprooted, a trade cut short, a street quieter than before. The steel plan's managed contraction offered some retraining and support, but the sense of security, of a job for life, was gone. The unions fought for no layoff guarantees, but these lasted only 2 years before the axe fell again. Automation and imported steel did the rest. By the time the 1997 closure announcement came, the plant was already a shadow of its former self. The real decision had been made years earlier, in boardrooms and cabinet meetings, far from the furnace's glow. On April 29, 1997, the BHP board delivered the news that many had feared but few believed would ever come. The Newcastle Steelworks would close within 2 years. The announcement landed with a cold finality. 720 days until shutdown, a number that left no room for hope. Board members cited global competition and shrinking margins. But the message was simple. The era of Australian-made steel in Newcastle was over. Premier Bob Carr stood before the press that afternoon, calling the decision a national tragedy and promising support for those about to lose their livelihoods. The state's Hunter Advantage package, $30 million for retraining, small business grants and job placement, was announced almost immediately. For workers, the sum felt small beside the scale of what would be lost. The countdown had begun and the end was now fixed on the calendar. Demolition swallowed what generations had built, leaving behind nothing but cleared ground and the memory of furnaces. The bill for erasing the steelworks reached $120 million, spent on bringing down chimneys, scraping away poisoned soil, and hauling off the bones of the plant. But the cost was never just measured in dollars. In the 5 years after the closure, the suicide rate among hunter men aged 45 to 64 rose by half, climbing from 11 to nearly 17 per 100,000. The numbers tell a story of men left adrift when the work that anchored them was taken away. Responsibility for that loss sits with more than just the market. Senator John Button's steel plan in the 1980s forced Newcastle to shrink, trading jobs for survival. The BHP board made the final call in 1997, backed by economic models and distant shareholders. Union leaders fought for dignity in the end, but the outcome had already been written in Canberra and Melbourne boardrooms. Steel still comes to Australia, now on ships from Korea, Japan, China, unloaded at the same wharves that once sent Newcastle steel out to the world. The furnaces fell silent, but the decisions that killed them echo on. In a nation still exporting iron ore by the shipload, skilled hands and proud trades are left idle. What we choose to build or dismantle still decides who we become. The legacy isn't steel, it's what we've lost.